Good day, everybody. Good day, sir. I am Jenny, not you, not us, not we, but me, Chempo. And I will discuss about Nicomachean Ethics, books 2 and 3. Now, in Book 2 of Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle, he discusses two kinds of virtue, virtue of thoughts and virtue of character. For virtue of thought is acquired through teaching and requires experience and time to develop. On the other hand, virtue of character is developed through habituation. Aristotle emphasizes that moral virtues are not innate but can be cultivated through habitual practice. He highlights the importance of virtuous behavior in shaping one's character. Now, Book 2 of Nicomachean Ethics delves into various aspects of virtue and character, providing insight into how they are acquired and cultivated. Now, let's explore each chapter or sections with real-life examples to understand further. Now, in Chapter 1, how a virtue of character is acquired. In this part, Aristotle explains that the virtue of character are acquired through habit and practice, not by nature. We become just by doing just action and temperate by doing temperate actions. This part of Aristotle's discussion emphasizes that virtues of character are learned through practice and repetition, not something we are born with. So, meaning, this is just innate or not something we're born with. He says that by consistently doing good actions like being fair or showing self-control, we become virtuous. So, being fair makes us just, and showing self-control makes us temperate. It's all about practicing these virtues until they become a natural part of who we are. Now, in Chapter 2, Habituation, Aristotle emphasizes the role of habituation in developing virtues. By repeatedly performing virtuous actions, we develop a disposition towards virtue. In this chapter, Aristotle highlights the importance of habituation in shaping our virtues. He explains that by consistently practicing virtuous action, we develop a habit of disposition towards virtue. Essentially, the more we do good things, the more natural it becomes for us to continue doing them. So, through repetition and practice, virtues become ingrained in our character. An example of this can be seen in a person who strives to develop the virtue of patience. By repeatedly practicing patience in challenging situations, such as patiently waiting in long lines or dealing with difficult people, they gradually develop a disposition towards patience, making it a natural part of their character. Now, in Chapter 3, the importance of pleasure and pain, Aristotle discusses the role of pleasure and pain in moral education. Virtuous people take pleasure in virtuous action and feel pain at the thought of vicarious actions. In this section, Aristotle talks about how pleasure and pain influence our moral education. He says that good people find pleasure in doing good things and feel bad when they think about doing bad things. Essentially, experiencing pleasure from virtuous action and discomfort from the idea of doing wrong helps shape our moral character. So, pleasure and pain play a big part in teaching us what's right and wrong. Like, for example, consider a person who values kindness and compassion. They take pleasure in performing acts of kindness, such as volunteering a homeless shelter or helping someone in need. Conversely, they feel pain at the thought of engaging in cruel or selfish actions. Pleasure and pain serve as motivators and reinforce virtuous behavior. Now, in chapter 4, virtuous actions versus virtuous character. This section distinguishes between performing virtuous actions and having a virtuous character. Virtuous actions are not enough to make one virtuous. One must also have the right intentions and feelings. It highlights the difference between simply doing good things and actually being a virtuous person. While performing virtuous actions is important, true virtue goes behind just action. It involves having the right intentions and feelings behind those actions, reflecting a virtuous character. Let's take the example of generosity. Simply donating money or material possessions does not necessarily make someone generous. True generosity involves having the right intentions and feelings behind the act, such as giving selflessly and genuinely caring for the well-being of others. Now let's proceed to Chapter 5. Chapter 5, Virtue of Character and its Genius. Aristotle defines virtue of character as a state that decides, lying in a mean relative to us, which is determined by reason and as a wise person would determine it. Aristotle defines virtue of character as a state that lies in a mean relative to us, determined by reason and wisdom. An example of this can be found in the virtue of courage. Courage is not the absence of fear or recklessness, but rather finding the right balance between cowardness and rashness. It involves facing fears with bravery and taking calculated risks when necessary. Now, let's proceed to Chapter 6, Virtue of Character and its Differentia. This part further explains the nature of virtue of character by identifying its differentiating features. Virtue is a mean state between excess and deficiency, and it involves choosing the mean for the right person. This part further explains virtue of character by identifying its differentiating features. Virtue is a mean state between excess and deficiency. For instance, consider the virtue of humility. It lies between arrogance, which is the excess, and self-deprecation, which is the deficiency. Humble individuals have a balanced view of themselves, neither inflating their own importance nor diminishing their worth. Now, imagine being a good person is like walking on a narrow path. On one side is doing too much of something good, and the other side is not doing enough. Being virtuous means finding the right balance in between. For example, being brave means not being too afraid or too reckless, but finding the right amount of courage. It's not just about doing good things, but also doing them for the right reasons. So being virtuous is about finding that sweet spot between doing too much and too little, and doing it with the right intentions. Now, in Chapter 7, the particular virtues of character. Aristotle discusses several specific virtues of character, including bravery and temperance, and describe how each is a mean between extremes. Aristotle delves into various virtues such as bravery and temperance, emphasizing that each virtue lies between two extremes. For instance, bravery is neither being excessively reckless nor overly fearful, but rather finding the balance between the two. This highlights the idea that virtuous character involves navigating between extremes to embody the essence of each virtue. For example, temperance lies between indulgence and abstinence. Someone who practices Temperance finds the right balance in their consumption of food, drink, and other pleasures. Now let's proceed to chapter 8, the relations between mean and extreme states. This chapter explores the relationships between the mean and the extremes, which is the vices. The virtue is the mean. Aristotle argues that the mean extremes are opposed to each other in different ways. Now let's take the virtue of honesty for instance. It stands as a mean between the extremes of dishonesty, which is the excess, and blunt rudeness, which is the deficiency. Honesty avoids deceitfulness and tactless bluntness. Aristotle highlights that finding the right balance requires thinking things through, while the extremes often come from strong emotions or impulsive actions. Now let's proceed to chapter 9. How can we reach the mean? Now Aristotle provides practical advice on how to achieve the mean. He suggests that we should avoid the extreme that is more contrary to the mean and be wary of the pleasures and pains that led us astray. In these parts, Aristotle offers practical guidance on reaching the mean. He advises us to steer away from the extreme that is further from the balanced middle ground and to be cautious of pleasures and pains that might tempt us away from it. Essentially, he encourages us to consciously choose actions that bring us closer to the balanced virtue rather than being swayed by excessive desires of fears. For example, if someone tends to lean towards the extreme of stinginess, they should consciously avoid excessive frugality and focus on being more generous. Additionally, they should be mindful of the pleasure and pains that might lead them astray from the virtuous mean. And that's all for the book 2. Now let's proceed to book 3. Now in book 3 of Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle explores the precondition necessary for the development of virtue and delves into the individual virtues of character. He emphasizes the importance of habituation and cultivating moral virtues, discussing the role of both upbringing and choice in shaping one's character. Aristotle identifies several key virtues, including courage, temperance, and generosity, and provides insights into how these virtues contribute to human flourishing and ethical living. To understand it more further, let's proceed to the next slide. Now in chapter 1, voluntary action, this section or chapter discusses the concept of voluntary actions, which are those that are performed intentionally and willingly. Aristotle argues that moral virtue and vice pertain only to such actions. This chapter focuses on the concept of voluntary actions, which are actions that are performed intentionally and willingly. Aristotle argues that moral virtue and vice pertain only to voluntary actions. In other words, one can only be held morally responsible for actions that are within their control. For example, someone choosing to adopt a rescue pet from a shelter, knowing that it requires time, effort, and responsibility. Another example, a person deciding to study for an exam instead of going out with friends, recognizing the importance of academic success. And that is chapter 1 of book 3. Now let's proceed to chapter 2, the decision. Aristotle explores the nature of decision making, emphasizing that it involves rational deliberation and choice. It is thus crucial to the moral responsibility. Now, Aristotle explores the nature of decision making in this chapter. He emphasizes that decision making involves rational deliberation and choice. It is through the process of decision making that individuals determine the actions to take in order to achieve their goals. Aristotle considers decision making as a key component of moral responsibility. Like, for example, a students deliberating between pursuing a degree in engineering or psychology, carefully considering their interests, career prospects, and personal goals. Another example is an individual deciding whether to invest their money in or stocks or real estate, weighing the risk, potential returns, and their financial objectives. And that is chapter 2. It requires your decision making. Now in chapter 3, deliberation. This section delves into the process of deliberation, which Aristotle described as a form of inquiry into what one should do in a given situation. It is a rational process that precedes and informs decision making. Now, it involves considering various options, weighing their potential outcomes, and determining the best course of action. Like, for example, a couple deliberating on whether to buy a house or continue renting, taking into action factors such as financial stability, long-term plans, and market conditions. Another example, a manager considering different strategies to improve workplace productivity, analyzing their various approaches, potential outcomes, and their impact on the team. Now let's proceed to chapter 4, which is wish. Here, Aristotle examines the notion of wishing, distinguishing it from other states such as desire and deliberation. He suggests that wish pertains to the end or goal, while deliberation and decision pertain to the means to that end. Now, Aristotle examines the notion of wishing in this chapter. He distinguishes wish from other states such as desire and deliberation. Wish plays a crucial role in motivating and directing human actions. Like, for example, someone wishing to start their own business and taking the necessary steps to develop a business plan, secures funding, and launch their venture. Another example is a person wishing to become a professional musician and dedicating hours to practice, taking lessons, and performing at local venues. Therefore, wish plays a crucial role in motivating and directing human action. And that is chapter 4. Now let's proceed to chapter 5. Virtue and vice are in one power. In this section, Aristotle asserts that we are responsible for our virtues and vices because they result from our voluntary action. Sorry guys sa kanang sound kay dool mi sa nag-grass cut. Okay. Now, Aristotle argues that individuals have the ability to cultivate virtuous character traits through deliberate practice and self-discipline. Similarly, vice is also within our power, as it arises from our choices to engage in morally reprehensible action. Like, for example, a person's actively developing the virtue of honesty by consistently telling the truth and being transparent in their interactions. Another example would be someone engaging in the vice of greed by constantly seeking material possessions at the expense of others' well-being and ethical considerations. Now let's proceed to chapter 6, bravery and its scope. Aristotle defines bravery as a mean between fear and confidence, and discusses its role in facing dangers, particularly in war. Bravery involves finding the right balance between being overly fearful and recklessly confident. It requires courage and the ability to assess risk accurately. An example of this would be a firefighter entering a burning building to rescue trapped individuals, displaying courage and bravery in the face of danger. Another example would be a person standing up against injustice and discrimination, risking their own safety and reputation to fight for what is right. And that is the chapter 6, Bravery and its Scope. Now let's proceed to chapter 7. Chapter 7, Bravery and its Characteristic Outlook. Now, this chapter further explores the nature of bravery, focusing on the brave person's outlook and response to fear. Aristotle highlights the importance of maintaining composure and rationality in the face of fear. A brave person acknowledges fear but does not allow it to paralyze or control their action. An example of this would be a soldier remaining composed and focused during combat despite experiencing fear and uncertainty. Another example would be an athlete competing in a high-pressure situation and maintaining a confident and determined mindset despite the presence of nerves and anxiety. Now let's proceed to chapter 8, Conditions that Resemble Bravery. Now, Aristotle identifies and discusses several states that resemble but are not true bravery in this chapter. These states include civic bravery, which were individuals engaged in acts of bravery for recognitions or reputations. Experience in war, where individuals may display bravery due to familiarity with war situations, and sanguinity, where individuals are naturally fearless, and ignorance, where individuals act bravely due to a lack of understanding the full risk involved. An example of this would be a person engaging in acts of bravery to gain recognition and praise from others rather than acting out of genuine courage and moral conviction. Another example would be an inexperienced individual acting bravely in a stimulated war scenario during military training but lacking the same level of bravery in real-life combat situations. Let's proceed to chapter 9. Feelings proper to bravery. Feelings proper to bravery. Here, Aristotle discusses the feelings associated with bravery such as confidence and fear, and how they are properly managed by the brave person. Bravery involves having the appropriate level of confidence in one's ability, while also recognizing and managing fear in a way that does not hinder one's actions. One of the example of this would be an experienced skydiver feeling a mix of fear and excitement before jumping out of a plane but managing their fear to execute the jump safely. Another example would be a mountain climber feeling a surge of confidence as they approach a challenging peak but maintaining a rational mindset to make calculated decisions during the ascent. Monisja ang opposite to chapter 8. Let's proceed to chapter 10, Temperance and its Scope. Aristotle defines temperance as a mean with regard to pleasures, particularly those of touch and taste in this chapter. Temperance involves moderation and self-control when it comes to indulging in pleasurable experiences. It requires finding a balance between excess and deficiency, avoiding both overindulgence and complete abstinence. An example of this would be someone practicing temperance by enjoying occasional indulgences in their favorite desserts but maintaining a balanced, healthy overall diet. Another example would be an individual practicing temperance with regard to alcohol consumption, enjoying a moderate amount of drinks without succumbing to excessive drinking or addiction. And that is Chapter 10, Temperance and Scope. Now let's proceed to Chapter 11, Temperance, its Outlook. Now, this chapter further explores the nature of temperance, focusing on the temperate person's relation to pleasures and pain. Aristotle emphasizes that a temperate person that does not completely reject pleasures but approaches them with moderation and self-restraint. They are able to enjoy pleasures without becoming enslaved by them or allowing them to negatively impact their well-being. An example of this would be a person enjoying a night out with friends and participating in social activities while maintaining self-control and avoiding excessive behaviors. Another example of this would be an individual savoring a piece of chocolate cake and appreciating its taste and pleasure without overindulging and experiencing guilt or negative health consequences. And that is chapter 11, Temperance and its Outlooks. Now let's proceed to the last chapter, chapter 12, Intemperance. Now, Aristotle discusses intemperance in this final chapter of Book 3. He describes intemperance as a vice characterized by excess with regard to pleasures. And the intemperate individual lacks self-control and indulge in pleasures to an excessive and harmful degree. Aristotle considers intemperance to be more blameworthy than cowardice, as it involves knowingly engaging in excessive and detrimental behavior. An example of this would be an individual engaging in excessive gambling, risking their financial stability and well-being due to an inability to control their impulses. Another example would be someone consistently overeating to the point of obesity, disregarding the negative impact on their health and quality of life. And that is chapter 12, the intemperance. It is somehow opposite to chapter 11 and 10, the temperance. And that would be all. Thank you.